So good evening and a warm welcome to each one of you. To those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'm Leena, convener of RC-32, which is on pedagogy, teaching and learning. A little bit about the RC. This RC aims to provide an enabling space to listen to and have conversations around theoretical and empirical work, methods and methodologies, teaching practices, and reflections relating to the broader fields of teaching and learning sociology. We have consistently in our RC, in all our sessions, we have grounded the classroom as a vital site of knowledge production. Both classrooms in the traditional sense that we know, as well as those outside those traditional classrooms. They might be in communities, public spaces, and in our everyday lived experiences. At the same time, you also know there is no single uniform classrooms, each shape and political context. Today, we turn our attention to one of the most important sides of learning, and that is the school. And I do not think we have done this before, and I'm so glad we are doing this today. It is a fact that we live in a highly fragmented and fractured society, marked by all kinds of hierarchies and exclusions, especially along caste, class, gender, and many more. And I think a first encounter with inequality and segregation happens right there in the schools. Right here in Mumbai, I have personally witnessed the struggles of children from the lower socioeconomic classes who take admission under the RTE Act in elite schools, only to find that inclusion does not always translate into belonging. And of course, the resistance of schools to position them as equal entities on campus. I think there is much to know and discuss, especially in light of what we have been witnessing in the last 35 days or so. And I think that's how everything just manifested itself. There was so much that came up in terms of the kind of society that we live in, the deep fault lines, so on and so forth. And I'm sure some of this will come up. And I'm glad we have a wonderful panel today to address these and many more issues, as I said. It's my pleasure to welcome Manoj, Nirmali, and Smriti. And let me introduce Manoj, who will moderate the session today. Manoj currently serves as a faculty member in the School of Education at Azim Premji University, Bengaluru, a position that he has held since 2014. He has worked in school education across both settings with organizations involved in initiatives such as in-service teacher education programs, the development of learning materials for schools, as well as projects at the grassroots level. Along with this engagement, along with this engagement with practice, he has maintained a sustained interest in education theory. And I must thank Manoj for suggesting the theme of this session. It was Manoj who put together a lovely concept note for our panelists, and he has worked on it and enabled this. So thank you so much, Manoj, for this. And may I now invite you to take this session forward.
Thank you, Leena, and thank you everyone for joining. I know it's Saturday, and joining on Saturday in the evening particularly isn't easy for all of us. We always have these busy weekdays, so thanks for taking the time. Yes, so while we were just thinking about this panel, we thought that this is a significant topic for education debate. That's how class operates through education, and education sort of realized through class structures. This has been a sort of general interest in sociology of education ever since we have been doing sociology of education in India and in other places as well. But in general, when we talk about class, we don't necessarily, think education as one of the significant asset, if I may use this term, asset for education or resource, where we have class politics. Whenever we think about class, we have scarce resources like land or some kind of sort of struggle or contestations around wages and profit. So those images usually we have when we think about class politics in India and other places as well. So even in the set of works we have on class in India, we get reminded of one classic work by D.N. Dhanagre on this agrarian class structure and peasant movement, or works by Anand Chakravarti and several other sociologists and anthropologists of previous. Uh, this is the sort of work we have, and we always knew that education is something which shapes the class politics. But education, as such, coming at the surface of political contestation and everyday political action is uh, I won't say it's new. It's been there with all kinds of reservation debates in India, where we had several agitation. But what we are witnessing now, that's unprecedented. That there is a mass mobilization, political mobilization around the issue of education, right? Even when we speak here, thousands of students are already, you know, on the streets everywhere in Delhi and other places, and their parents, right? And the key thing is education, which is coming up. So while we were conceptualizing this idea, we didn't get this sense that this will be the setting where we will be talking about these issues. But now I realize this is such a significant, uh, you know, um, issue to discuss now with Smriti, our colleague, and Nirmali, the kind of work they have done about this idea of class formation. That's a very different way of conceptualizing class they have done. And it was quite striking to note that though they have worked in two different contexts, right? Their material condition were very different. Material conditions of their participants were very different. But there is a shared grammar of aspiration which brings these two works together. That's the way I started reading these two works, two sets of works. That Smriti's work, which is set in Gurugram gated communities, very globalized middle classes with their aspirations, and some groups which is part of sort of global circuit of capital, and their way of conceptualizing their position, class position, and visualizing the social spaces they are inhabiting. And the key thing which Smriti has highlighted, they just sort of put this, the anchor for their identity is that they are educated, and they are different in terms of the way they are educated, or the way they speak, the way they conduct themselves. That distinguishes them from the kind of groups which they find that they are surrounded with, right? So there are other groups in Gurgaon. Those of us know Gurgaon. It's so interesting to read the paper by Smriti and her work. That it's a other group, and the similar situation you'll find in Bengaluru, possibly also in Hyderabad, and all these cities where these outskirts and places like Gurgaon are coming up. So rural population, urban population, in terms of material wealth, they are not very different. Both the groups have money, but one group is trying to mark their distinction, and the element through which they can make their distinction is that they are educated in certain ways. So it's about the school choices they make for their children, and these school choices are often around the idea of Ivy curriculum or international school, or this idea that their children are going to be part of global, circuit. So that's the preparation they are having. Yes. So, before I move to Nirmali, very quick, introduction to Smriti. Those of you who don't know her work. Currently, she is assistant professor in Indraprastha Institute of technology, which is widely known as triple IIT, right? Triple IIT Triple IIT Delhi. Smriti has worked earlier also with Ambedkar University. She had been with us here in Azim University also for a while. She has taught in Ladies Ram College for Women in Delhi University. Smriti did her PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University, and she was also fellow for Fulbright Nehru. And she has worked as a scholar within that. Recently, her book was published by Routledge in 2023. The title of the book, I will get it, is just. So it's the middle class in New Urban India. So this is the book which we are referring to in today's discussion, and she can also refer to our other research. Our research area is now wide. It includes education, I'm sure, but it also includes other themes like southern urbanism, urban spaces, community. She also works on media, youth, and gendered mobility and practices. We also have Nirmali with us, and Nirmali work is interesting, and somewhere, it looks like that both the works are in conversation. Again, as I said, this idea of aspiration and idea of aspirations around education. But Smriti work and that's ethnographic work she has done, possibly as a PhD scholar, she has started working in this domain, and then she continued. It's Weaver's Lanes of Varanasi, and also communities in Assam. How the parents in these, sort of low middle classes or possibly also working classes in some ways or artisan communities, they are making choices for schooling for their children. And those choices are also bounded in terms of their concerns around security of their daughter, their concerns around the distance to the school, their concerns also around that whether English as a language is culturally distant. So this idea of distance has several layers of meaning that emerges in her work. That this distance, whether that can be praised or what. Nirmali works is personally very, very, sort of. I have my personal interest in the kind of works he has done on language. Our book came in 2017 from SAYS. It's on the legitimizing standard language. But since then, Nirmali has also expanded her research interests. She has now interest in studying community in the longer term and all other engagements she has. But she sort of sustained her interest in language education or the language debate, if not language education. It's a debate about multilingualism and other settings. Nirmali has done her PhD from IIT Kanpur, and since then she is working in Tezpur University as an assistant professor. So we have these two scholars today, and what we'll do, we'll have 15 to 20 minutes for each, and then we'll have question and answer interaction with all of us. So that's the plan. So I may invite Smriti to start the conversation, take some 15-20 minutes, and then we can move on to Nirmali's work. Smriti, over to you.
Thank you, Manoj. Thank you, Leena, for putting this panel together. It's incredibly nice to meet people that you liked and then meet them in different contexts and continue to revisit those relationships. And I mean, it's always learning experience to get together, interact with other people's work on similar lines. I really liked how the note kind of brings together both the works. So I'm going to stick to the themes of the note so that it's easier to converse with Nirmali's work and the panel kind of comes together. So it was really helpful. Thank you so much for that. So quickly, yes, the work kind of started with looking into I want to start with how my aspirations as a PhD scholar was to study this idea of the new middle class and what the new middle class understands in terms of education and what is it that it aspires for. But when I reached the context, I realized that something entirely different is happening. Something much bigger than what I had previously imagined is actually happening on the ground. So then the work kind of moved beyond how this new middle class is to how this new middle class relates to the evolving context that we have. And space became particularly important. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. Quickly, to understand what has happened in the context, and the context is kind of important, is to understand how urbanization has taken shape in India and how middle class is entwined with the ways in which urbanization has been progressing up until some point of time, because, and I look at it in the larger work, I look at it in 3 stages, which is to look at it as colonial middle class being cultivated through colonial urbanization and the kind of jobs that it opened up, the kind of centers that were developed, and a section of people who did not need to depend on primary ways of sustenance, then emerging and being cultured by this colonial administration and the colonial government. To the post-independence Nehruvian middle class that was much, much more dependent on state. So they were bigger on perk, lower on salary, but bigger on perk kind of Nehruvian middle class that was cultivated through the new urban centers that were developed and expanded in the independent India. This became a middle class that was trying to build the nation, that was trying to also build the capacity of the nation, and therefore English became one of the ways in which the ideas also started growing in terms of being able to build a capacity for India that can interact with other contexts and grow. To what is happening now is that urbanization has gone entirely in the hands of private real estate developers. And so this is privatized urbanization, which is happening. The state involves itself in the most minimalist capacity. And therefore, now we see that the section of middle class which is coming up is significantly different and associates itself with these new urban spaces. Gurugram being one, like Manoj had pointed out, and I absolutely like hat tip to that, which is Chennai, the outskirts of Chennai, the outskirts of Bengaluru, the outskirts of Hyderabad. All of these, Cyberabad becomes another context like this. ESR in Bangalore becomes a context like this. And so what is happening is not that these cities are expanding. What is happening is that the peripheral villages are being acquired. Land is being acquired in peripheral villages in swaths and being developed by real estate developers. Now, in that kind of an urbanization, what happens is that the state infrastructure remains suppressed, which was not the case with the Nehruvian urbanization. And so the state infrastructure always is dwarfed as compared to private real estate development, especially residential. And so now we're looking at privatized urbanization in New Gurugram. However, the pace at which this urbanization has progressed, what it has done is that it has brought into clash a section of population that was agrarian previously, but has suddenly been empowered by the new cash flow coming from land deals, with a section of population that considers itself extremely educated, legally authorized to occupy the space. So there is a moral claim over the space and there is a legal claim over the space, which comes into kind of a conflict. And at which point, like Manoj had pointed out, and I really appreciate the fact that he's interacted so well with the work, there is a comparability in terms of material wealth. There is a comparability in terms of the capital, the economic capital that they own. And therefore, then the movement or the distinction cannot be drawn upon economic capital. Then distinction has to move to a different sort of a capital. And therefore, this section of middle class, which has previously benefited from all kinds of state protections and state programs, including public funded education, then goes to the next important bit, which is the educatedness. And that educatedness comes from urban sophistication. It is English education. It is being able to speak in English, knowing and being globally aware as a way of arguing one's own distinction. And so that becomes the critical edge upon which this kind of a distinction plays out. Elsewhere, I have argued about how it is important to understand that within the existing repertoire, any middle class formulates its distinction contextually based on the repertoire of capital that exists. This particular case, because they are engaging with an agrarian population, invariably English-speaking urban sophistication becomes an important dimension of that kind of a distinction. And so that is the one that plays out. What it results in is this very selective kind of a belonging, which is what Manoj was talking about. And I again, thanks to you for interacting with the work so much. There is this distancing of oneself from the local context and the local politics in such a measure that while one occupies a physical space in Gurugram, everything in one's vocabulary, one's language, one's referencing, one's aspirations is so globally attuned. So, like I like to say, nobody is living in Gurugram, everybody is living in Gurugram as well as somewhere else. Simultaneously. So there is this distance that one draws from the place where they are to the place where they want to be or they imagine themselves to be. And so Millennium City, all the kinds of gated enclaves that you come across constantly reference sites that are elsewhere, including the Park Avenue or Arcadia or one of Magnolia, Daffodil, all of these anglicized including the architecture, the ways in which these gated enclaves have been built. This idea is to be as far away from the context where you are as is possible. This translates also in terms of education. So education cannot just be something that is accessible to everybody within the context. It needs to be something that goes beyond the context. And that beyond the context then is translated into the desire for increasing demand and desire for international, global, world schools that are mushrooming all across India. But then if you look at the kind of sites where they have taken over and have mushroomed, these would invariably be these peri-urbanized, neo-urban sort of contexts. And so now education needs to be slightly more than what is available locally, because this is also a measure of that distance from the local context. International education becomes particularly important. I situate this in the context of futurity and globality. I talk about globality not in terms of an abstract sense of being global or a standardized way in which everybody is a global community. I speak of it in Appadurai's context, which is contextual understanding of what it means to be global. For us, being global means being able to talk in English, having a vocabulary which is not just sophisticated, it is not easily accessible. We consider an English which is difficult to understand and an accent which is difficult to understand with globality. And that becomes the vernacular ways in which we understand globality. We do not think of French as global as we think of a French accent to English as global. And so these things become important, particularly in terms of how there is a selective belonging to the context. So international schools and gated communities become the way of selectively belonging to a context while occupying the context while selectively belonging elsewhere. So this is one of the things which kind of emerges from the work. The other thing which I talk about in this particular paper is how it was curious because school choice had been talked about in multiple measures, including, yes, distance, gender, how menstruating girls are stopped immediately as they go to secondary school, from accessing education, which might be further than 3 kilometers away. We know that caste, religion all play a significant role in terms of the choice that parents make of schooling. We also know in terms of middle class and class implications for the choice of school, that middle classes have been making this selective exit from state-funded education to private English medium education as a way of some sort of a social mobility, some sort of a collective engagement, and carving out some sort of a distinction within the group of middle class. And so English education, Ladauza's work is excellent in pointing that out. English education becomes the aspirational education. What emerged from my interaction with people in Gurugram was that there is an intergenerational shift which is happening. So everybody who was 25 and under, which were like a few of them, none of them were educated from state-funded schools. Meanwhile, 35 and above still had a larger chunk of their education which had happened in a state-funded or an aided school. Even an aided school would be something that I would consider still within the purview of larger state sort of a arrangement. And now what was happening was that all this population 26 to 45 was sending their children to international schools in hopes of this sense of a futurity. That futurity then becomes how various social classes have access to developing this kind of a globality, or the end product of sending them across to another context, being able to situate them in a global kind of a context. So this is now becoming the way in which we are translating opportunities based on the social position of individuals, and which becomes a very different way in which class is intervening in terms of determining what kind of choices we make about school. What emerged was also the sense of there was a minority of parents who thought that hunger versus exposure kind of a dimension that they play out, which is, again, it's kind of a leftover from the previous generation, which thought that you needed to feel extremely ordinary in order for you to understand what it means to excel at something, and for that hunger to be there to excel. That existed. Meanwhile, there was this larger section of population that thought that they needed to crack the code. They needed to understand how the system is working. They need to crack the code, whether it is SATs, whether it is GMAT. Something needs to go according to this kind of like a cheat code to how you crack the system. And so they're trying to do that. And international schools becomes one of those things in the larger idea of how to crack that code, including the fact that examinations become another way in which we are cracking the code. To at least this section of population is like, well, we need to know how the examinations work and we need to crack them so that we can move. So it would be one exam here, IIT here, possibly. And if you cracked IIT, then CAT. If you do not crack CAT, then GMAT, and then you get out of India. That is the way in which they are looking at it. But exposure becomes also an important way in which to crack the system, because I may not be a competitive swimmer, but if my child knows how to swim, then my child has the repertoire to engage with a child that has grown in a Western context, has access to a swimming pool, and knows how to swim. And so it will be an easier connection and networking, which would then give social capital to this child to move forward, the kind of experiences that count in a Western education system. So we're constantly wanting to situate children, not just in terms of board of education, but also in terms of their hobbies, their repertoire, their engagement, and their upbringing, to not be situated within the context, but away from it. The other interesting bit which I found in my fieldwork was that we constantly thought that neighborhood only featured in class considerations of schooling as in terms of the distance or the duration of travel or the cost of the school which is available within the neighborhood. What we did not quite feature was how class becomes performative. It is performative in the sense that there is no script that exists, but in the doing of this distinction, the script gets it keeps getting sharper and sharper. It finds its edges, it finds its dimensions. And so because education became one of the ways in which we were thinking about distinction now, and urban sophistication was one of the ways in which we were thinking about distinction, it became particularly important then. within the concept of futurity and globality, to send your children to international schools, not just because it gives children an edge, but it brings a performative value to being middle class. Sort of a bolstering of a claim that one belongs to middle class, educated middle class, because one is aware and one is understanding enough of the challenges, has eyes on the future, and therefore is sending the child to international schools. And so, as one of the respondents put it, he said that I live in this gated enclave. If I have children, I do not even have the choice to not send them to international school, because it would be seen as not behaving according to one's class status. And therefore, it puts into question my claim to that particular class status, which was interesting because now, again, space is playing a very different role in terms of determining the choices, but not quite in the way that we thought space does. As a concluding remark, I would say that there is, what emerged from the work was that the school choices themselves are not just in terms of outcomes, but also becomes performative of class status. It becomes situated within a context. If we have to understand school choices and if we have to understand class, the one thing that I would say emerges from the work is that the spatial fracture and the spatial politics becomes critical in understanding how those decisions are being made. And with that, I would wrap up. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Smriti. Yeah, I think you just touched upon all the aspects of your work, most of the aspects of your work. And possibly Nirmali can just take it up from here. Particularly, as Nirmali can focus on the side of school choices and how it is bounded. The place where you ended your presentation, right? It is conceived as a rational choice, free choice of an individual. But even when we see places like Gurgaon or Whitefield, where actually it appears as if it's a individual's choice, or it's a family choice, often it is bounded by context, the very composition of capital, three forms of capital, both of you have referred. It's so interesting to read these two works where major references are coming from both you, and both you's idea of class and the distinction and everything. So I had to go back to both you to kind of appreciate the work you have done, appreciate the work which Nirmali has done, and yeah, it's so fascinating. So Nirmali, over to you again, 15-20 minutes. Then we'll have some conversation with our colleague who have joined the conversation right now.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you, Leena, for pursuing this and putting together this fantastic team. Thank you so much, Manoj, for putting in the effort, reading up so closely, and of course giving us this theme on class acts, schooling, space, and belonging in India. And I completely agree with you that the timing could not have been more apt. Given the context, when for the first time, perhaps, educational issues have kind of gained political traction, contrary to if we look at the one of the lament of most of the sociologists and the educationists in general has been always the attention has been less on education. Of course, in terms of rhetoric, there has always been an emphasis, but here for the first time there seems to have emerged from varied positionalities a kind of consensus that when we look at the public discourse also around education, that there is a kind of from different political positions also there seems to be a very strong investment in agreement on the potential of education as an investment in a nation's life. There could be varied interpretations of how to realize it. But at this very time, when we are looking at the school education and schooling in general, suddenly everything was still. So when we are talking about a context which is deeply stratified, where divisions are not simply in terms of public funded schools versus the private schools, but there are deep layers within each categories, and then added to that there are tremendous regional variations. And I have been fortunate to have had the opportunity to examine some of these dynamics into different contexts. One in North India, in the city of Banaras, which has a long history of being a trade center, center of trade and commerce along the Gangetic Belt, and in rural context of Assam, in the northeastern state. So I'll be talking about these two different contexts. And I'll start by talking about the field in Banaras, where I hope I have to finish this within time. So what I'll do, I'll in between try to structure it and also read. So what is specific about these two locations is, as rightly pointed out, both are non-metropolitan spaces. You can, in post-colonial terminology, you can call them as provincial centers of education. So if I look at Banaras, it has a long history of settlement, systems of patronage, which kind of sustain its claim as a center of culture, literature, as well as education in the northern belt, as which had implications for its emergence as an urban space that witnessed huge socio spatial, transfigurations of the space through colonial administrative practice of demarcation of the city into cantonment, civil lines, slums, which was kind of overlain on its older kind of demarcation of uh, Pakka Mahal, Kacha Mahal, older city, the new city, the peripheral city. So all these categorizations, town plannings, and its reworking had kind of put in a background through which we have to understand the emergence of school space, where different families located in different social locations make kind of a competing kind of choice out of existing networks, where Mohalla becomes a certain kind of a socially marked space, which is a place where the traditional occupational living kind of coexists with emerging kind of a new economy that Smriti has so well put out. The kind of transformations in political economic sense that is coming up coexists with the traditional artisanal occupations or the occupations that had existed in Benares from before. So it is in between these, different kinds of economic systems that families located at the margins that are making choices of school. So whenever we are talking about school choice in terms of, through these large scale surveys of talking about a shift from government schools, the lower classes, it was never a news when the upper middle classes had always made clear kind of preferences in terms of school education from the 80s onwards. But in last 2 decades, the news, the emphasis has been that, even the lower classes, including there are different kinds of terminologies that have been used. You can use informal working class or working class or the urban poor, whatever term you use. That the choice is not simple in terms of choosing between a government school or a private school, because the private school itself is immensely varied. I'll come to many details of these political economic questions much later, because I want to cover a broad range of canvas here. So when I looked, what I did in Banaras was I was doing an ethnography of a particular school which was seen as a semi-English medium school. Again, going beyond the binary of Hindi medium versus the English medium, the private schools usually being, seen as giving good education in English as one of the distinguishing markers. But this was a school which was running one section or one wing in English medium, but was largely a Hindi medium private school, which commanded a fee, because of which only the upwardly mobile families from the weaving classes could afford to go to this kind of a school. And that made it very different. It had the reputation of being a very quality-oriented standard English school because of the credential, the social capital that was enjoyed by the patron of the school. There was huge investments in uh, uh, the annual fests that are organized. Then there was a huge investment in the high school leaving classes to assure that only the 100% attendance, 100% result is achieved in the school. And that's a common story across most private schools. So this school had a high reputation within the neighborhood. It mainly drew its students from families that were primarily reliant on the Banarsi sari trade at different stages. Some families were still in the trade directly involved, some were moving out of it towards different sectors. And it had a mixed population of Hindu and Muslim, both coming from lower income groups. Uh, 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 of course, the predominantly Hindu, but both Hindus and Muslim somehow connected with this world of Banarsi sari weaving at different stages. I had also done my ethnography of a particular neighborhood, which was of Ansari weavers, where and when I started, my interest in the school was mainly from the prism of understanding the language ideologies. I was interested in understanding the processes through which this is one of the marker. Language is one of the marker of class, as was suggested also, highlighted also by uh, Smriti in the previous, but she was talking more in terms of English. Here also, English was the key, seen as the language of aspiration. But because of the class because of the groups that it catered to, it was also important to look at this school as one school that will allow students who never used standard languages to make that kind of a bridge and connection to the world of standard language use itself. Now, because and that's where I feel it is very important to look at work that emerge from non-metropolitan centers, because while the metropolitan centers and the urban middle class practices there set the norm, they act as the reference group and set the norm for middle classes elsewhere. But at the same time, crossing these bridges, and people who are not part of this, newly liberalized service sector oriented economy where standard languages are the norm. So, how do we talk about aspirations and mobility strategies of families who are still moving out from the other kind of traditional economic occupations where moving towards the standard language itself is a big struggle, and that's where schooling actually helps them to connect them to their aspired middle class identity. And that's the story I wanted to emphasize. There's a very small incident that kind of captures this dilemma of a particular lady. So initially, when I was talking to the students in the school, they were all talking to me in terms of, we all Hindus, as we speak Hindi, all Muslims as we speak Urdu at home. But anyone who has visited the eastern part of North India knows that that there the language, the standard Hindi is not necessarily the language that is used outside the school or even inside the school in the informal spaces of the school. Where a very and the history of the city is also very important because this has been the center of the Hindustani kind of a movement, which for the first time made kind of a case to recognize Sanskritized Hindi written in Devanagari script as the official language of the province, in addition to Urdu, which finally, towards the early years of independence, forms the kind of nationalist narrative around the issue of official language. So this is the background, and later on in the 1970s, also is the epicenter of the Angrezi Hatao Andolan. So it is in this context that we can see how language identities get completely polarized, and we and kind of and when students for the first time identify with these standard languages, that as a Hindu I speak Hindi, and as a Muslim I speak Urdu, it's only after visiting their home, in their community spaces, in the neighborhood context, that one gets to unravel the complexity of languages, in which the class identities, class aspirations, without an understanding of which we cannot actually, hope to understand the class identities and class aspirations of these segments of people. So one story, if I have the time, is that of Sajia, which I talked about in a very sucking manner. When she was talking to me about her daughter's education, school, and she's the one. This is a Muslim woman whose daughter she's sending to this particular, co-ed school, and she herself is very proud of the fact that she has completed her own primary education from a madrasa where she studied in Urdu, which makes her different. Again, distinction in a very different context. So she is very proud of the fact that unlike anyone else in her in-laws family, including her husband, she is the one who knows how to speak in Urdu, and therefore she can visit her daughter's school during the parents-teacher meeting. And she's the one who is very invested, and kind of to emphasize the point, she makes a reference to a trip that she makes as a to pilgrimage to Hajj, where she was able to talk to a Kashmiri woman, from a completely different social setting from that of a muhalla in Banaras, which where weaving is done. She is able to converse to her, and she gives me a kind of a very succinct statement when she says that school se zuban tootti hai, which which basically, through which she's trying to suggest that it is the schooling that breaks open the rigidities of tongue, the rigidities that come with spatial embeddedness, the freedom from the muhalla is that she is trying to aspire for, is through her reliance on schooling. And that is where we also come to this understanding of how do we make choices. When we come to the understanding of choices of school, it is very important to understand the spatial embeddedness of living, and how different strategies are required, different class acts are required, how she makes sure that her children are not mixing with the children of the muhalla, so that they don't pick up the same language. She makes sure that there is a tutor, private tutor hired for instructions in English and maths and other subjects that she cannot check. So these are the strategies through which she's actually investing in the future of her children, and she's taking a kind of pride. And it is not a coincidence that in the big extended family, she is the one who is always coming and talking and interacting with me about all kinds of issues in her family. So that is where the issue of context becomes important when we come to the issue of school choice. When as you rightly suggested, we have drawn these ideas. We are indebted to the work of Bourdieu and how it got extended by several other scholars like Deandre, Bev Skeggs in Indian context, several others who have also expanded upon our understanding. So when I come to this uh, account of school, I want to make two quick points. What are the two major points that I want to highlight? One, of course, which has already been presented as the theme of the session, is that instead of looking at class as a fixed socioeconomic category, we are here looking at class as how it is being continually practiced, embodied through Zuban. When it becomes part of your speech, it is embodied form of class practice. It is recognized or misrecognized in school spaces and all other kinds of spaces, and it is negotiated through everyday practices. This is how we come to the significance of class acts in schooling spaces. It also directs our, so this is an imagination where class positions are embodied and enacted through dispositions, tastes, classifications, and practices, where actors gain a practical sense of one's place and others' place. We are continuously figuring it out, as was brought it out in context of Gurgaon so well by Smriti. So when we look at its implication at large in urban spaces, we will no longer treat a mohalla or a gated colony or an international school or a government school as mere spaces in physical terms, but more importantly in social, symbolic, and material terms, spaces that are continuously being constituted through these practices of class. And here I want to bring out the second point, which where I would kind of make an assertion on the basis of my later works, is that the class acts, the way we are looking at class acts in Indian context, are inseparable from issues of honor and respect, that are articulations of caste practices and gender relations. And for an understanding of it, in other words, so when we are talking about class acts in relation to schooling, we have to pay close attention to how ideologies of caste, and more specifically ideas about honor and respect, which are gendered and community specific, they intersect with practices of class. And this understanding has actually shaped my understanding, about how families in relationship with school interact. As you have already pointed out that, in my work on school choice in Assam, which was in a rural context, where, in a village where the options are between a private low fee private school at this intersect, at the time, this becomes very important at the high school level, when the family has to make a choice of entering into high school, the 8 years of free education is no longer there. So that is the time when family has to make a crucial choice, which are very gendered choices. They are as much class choices as they are gendered, because if you look at the statistical numbers in many uh, districts of Assam, you will see that the number of girls in government schools, particularly at high school level, are much more than that of boys. Because this is the age when families have to think in terms of whether the boy joins the workforce or whether the girl is going to get married. These are the gender choices that one has to exercise in relation to schooling. And that is what we have seen, that is why it is not just the considerations of cost, but it is also considerations of how far is the school, how safe is the school in terms of security. Now, security here is, of course, a gendered construct, but is also a very community and ethnicity specific concern. Carol Vincent and others in European context talk about school, the right mix in a school that decides, that parents always look for. You always see what kind of students are actually going. In a very stratified society, we have different kind of schools catering to different kind of families, and the families always make the decisions on the basis of right mix of the school. So when we look at European context, this mix often comes in terms of class or status group practices. When we look at heterogeneous plural spaces, like in a village of Assam where there are different communities staying together, whether the school is inhabited primarily by the other ethnic group from the other religious group, can actually make a kind of a shift in parental decision making. So class does get intersected with ideas about community, about gendered notion of security. Discipline is another factor. Discipline is again a very gendered understand. I used to think that discipline is discipline, but discipline works differently for boys. That you want a good school for a boy who has some potential, you can invest for his future, but you want the teachers to be extremely strict. They can keep the boys in control. And the discipline for girls means that they will not indulge in fashion bazi, wearing bindi, tikli, chumka, and all those things, lipstick, carrying lipstick in the bags, that is not at all permitted. So the ideas about discipline, ideas about security, ideas about actually mix up with ideas about financial security. So the class acts are as much gendered as they are formed by ideologies of caste, community, and such configurations. So this is how my work in rural Assam actually helped me to also, you know, open up these issues about class acts and do I have 5 minutes more? Do I have some more time?
Oh, yeah, you can take few more minutes. Yes, I
Okay,
think so.
thank you. Because
Yeah.
this is one where I will be deviating, because this so far our discussion has primarily been in in the direction of trying to understand the relationship between school and the family, or school and the community. But I also want to stress upon the fact that we also need to have an understanding of schooling, you know, as a process, what it does within the space, the social space of schooling, because this is something that is also equally important. So if I draw from my this last example, how parents decide in terms of, whether the school is discipline oriented, whether it will actually regiment the boys and the girls or not. I was very, it's very important to understand these, how these class acts, the practices of class, affected by ideologies of caste, affected by ideologies of community oriented notions of gender, play out within the school space. And for that, we need to actually, we also have to look at the how the everyday routines, official curricula, the unofficial curricula of the school work out. And that is where I want to talk about these competing regimes of valuations that operate in the school, which are deeply influenced by our practices of class. Why is it that some students are considered as good, why some students are not considered as good, and how these are actually speaks in a manner that is appreciated by the student, by the teachers, administrators, and the same kind of speech gets actually mocked at when it comes to the peer group context, or when it comes to the playground context. So these competing regimes of valuations are very important to understand within the space of schooling, and that has implications for, and how do we make sense of schooling process and what it does to aspirants, people who have high hopes, who enter into this space of schooling with great hopes of mobility and future. So there is the, if you look at, so for example, quiet diligence, use of standard variation of standard variant of language, it may generate some kind of recognition, right, while and appreciation. Similarly, dressing modestly is another embodied class-based practice that is as much defined by middle-class sensibilities as by upper caste and dominant community norms. This is something that I have discussed in detail along with my one of another scholar, Navarupa Bhuya. We have discussed it in detail in one of the how dress becomes one of the important markers of how students are identified, how female teachers are demarcated from male teachers, and so on. So, which are beyond the formal curricular aspects of school life. So, in the end, what I want to highlight is that how these valuations are key to the practice of class, that are embodied and spatialized within and outside the space of school. And all these different embodied practices do not enter the institutional space of school with equal authority. So, the embodied confidence, audibility, entitlement to occupy the physical and conversational spaces can themselves express social positionings. And these evaluations does not simply rank pupils academically, it also helps to determine who can speak, who is heard, who becomes visible, who occupies the center stage, who belongs comfortably, and who remains peripheral in this whole business of schooling. I think I'll rest here and I'm open to more discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Nirmali, for bringing nuances to both the aspects. One, I feel that Varanasi or Banaras is much more difficult space to navigate, both literally as well as metaphorically. There are lanes and bylanes in Varanasi, which is much more, difficult to navigate if I compare it with places like Gurgaon or Gurugram now. So that aspect is needed, particularly what I feel that in places like Varanasi as a city space or as an urban space, it has layers of memories and community building. So one naturally get drawn into the ideas of communities, the idea of sort of, that how class intersects with, religious identities, ethnicity, and other, markers. So the word which comes more often when one reads your work and work on Varanasi or in, rural Assam, if I may go back to again Urdu, it's Habitas and the field. While reading Smriti reminds often this idea of distinction and all. I mean, it has to be brought together, and I'm sure I know that your work is not completely weighted to the idea of peer both. You have expanded this idea, but yes, that gives meaning to our understanding. Other aspect which I must, highlight is the way you are bringing the idea of schooling itself. That reminds me the work which Gert Besta has done. That is, schooling is not just a place for qualification. There are other functions of schooling. So his critique of this learnification of education, that schooling is also a place for socialization and individuation, right? So that has come so beautifully, the way you have captured some of the things, that what happens inside the schooling and how recognition itself differs from one arena, one location to other location, from the playground to the classroom and all such things. So yes, I think I'll open this for the larger conversation with other colleagues. And when time permits, we can just have further conversation. So questions, comments, right, on the two presentations. If you just raise your hand, we can have some questions and answers. You can also mention, the whom you are sort of what sort of addressing your question to. Yes. So I could see one hand. Please go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. My
Good
name is
evening.
Stuti, and the whole interaction was very insightful. I had a question for both panelists. Could you please recommend some beginner-friendly books or articles that explore the intersection of language, class, caste, and education? So I would really appreciate recommendations in the Indian context to help me understand these topics and related issues better as someone who aspires to be a teacher.
Nirmali, you want to go first?
Okay, so uh, about intersection of language, caste, class, and education. That is the question, right? A beginner-friendly text. Well, one person, it's not a beginner-friendly, but Chase Ladusa is someone whose work has actually been very helpful for me. But it's not a beginner friendly. For a beginner friendly text, I would recommend, you can read some of the uh, work that has come from sociolinguists, right? Like Ramakant Agnihotri's work on, language and education. The position papers on Indian languages that was there in 2005 National Curriculum Framework. Uh, I'd suggest that you start from there, the policy related discussions, and then come to, sociological kind of more sociological discussions. I think N. Jairam has also written about it, but that's a little older work. So yeah, these work come to my memory right now. If I remember something else, I'll get back.
Yeah, Smriti, you like to go, but before that, I also say that it's also possible to read, Nirmali's work on legitimizing language standardization or standard language.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's for beginner or what, but
Yeah, yeah,
it's in Indian context. So possibly that will also give you some insights. Yes, Smriti, please do add.
As beginner friendly, again, I would not be able to speak too much about the language bit. Larauza's work is one that we have all read, and it pretty much captures the fractures really well. I particularly like the way in which caste and the relationship between caste and class has been studied. There's Betley, and there is Haripriya Narasimhan's work about Tamil Brahmins and how caste has provided the first kind of push to situate middle class. And in my work also, I talk about how middle class itself standardizes caste practices and caste codes into a classed form. So this is a very the way in which it has been codified again favors the upper caste. And so that's there. About religion, I know Latika Gupta's work, she captures this really well. Krishna Kumar has written about language and class. So, I mean, some of those works would definitely help. Ramakant Agnihotri is a go-to person for this as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to both of you.
Yes, and Nirmali has also added work by Samila Rege, particularly if you're looking at the intersection of caste and mobility and such issues. We have our colleague Professor Giridhar Rao here as well. I will just request him at some point in time. He can also add few references for Stuti. But before that, we have another hand. It's Ishika, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Please go ahead.
Yes, that's right. Thank you. Thank you for this very interesting panel. My question is actually for Smriti. I was really interested in your reading of modernity at large, particularly Apodurai's discussion of imagined elsewheres. And it made me think of Tukas Pandhari. I've seen Varanasi, I've seen Gaya. They cannot be Tukas Pandhari. I'm thinking also about the role of teachers in imagining this futurity. In your ethnographic work, did you have interactions with teachers where they discussed what it means to gather cultural capital?
Thank you so much. That's a very interesting question. Actually, I did talk to teachers, and they were largely of the opinion, some of them were working in the most prestigious international schools, ones that brought also pedigree from being like really renowned in Delhi, and the renowned Delhi schools that have shifted to Gurgaon but have also become international, the pressure to become international. And so she pointed out that this is what she called it was the internationalism ki bimari, which is this understanding that you do not quite know where is it that you want to land with it. You do not know what is the end goal to that. You do not understand quite in what respect do you want this kind of an international or global education.
Mm-hmm.
You know, is that you want a juxtaposition of the social position that you currently have to the social position to kind of securing the social position for your future generation. The idea of futurity for the teachers is that this is the kind of education that we have. This is only going to go further and further in terms of this becoming standardized across contexts.
Mm-hmm.
What they do recognize is that the way in which we are doing internationalism is not quite that.
Mm-hmm.
So what
Mm.
has changed is that there is a different pedagogy, there is a different way. So you introduce labs, you introduce hands-on, and you introduce some of those buzzwords and some of those practices, some of those assessments, but you're essentially teaching the same concepts.
Right,
What you're doing is you're just trying to tweak it to fit into a certain kind of a paradigm.
right.
So it's
And
not fundamentally different. None of these teachers, by the way, have been trained in some of the
Right.
codes also. So there
Hmm.
is a wide gap in the way, and I really like the concept of that globality that Appadurai works with, which is to say that you interpret it in vernacular terms.
Right.
And so all the things that Nirmali is also talking about in terms of the sexual code of conduct, the disciplining of the boys and all of that, it kind of stays there.
Hmm.
It is a very unnatural match between this and where I want to be. So they want their children to be
Right.
extremely competitive in the most Indian parent sense.
Right.
But they want holistic education for their children. And you can understand that there is like a wide gap between those paradigms.
Right. It also makes me think about vernacular nationalism. In that, do you want to keep this, or do you want to have these students who are equipped to step outside of India, and
A
then
very
make
interesting
lives for them
argument
outside?
about the vernacular nationalism. So, how nationalism has grown has its own kind of should be studied, should be investigated about where it is going also. But there was a shift around 2014 where we decided that nationalism now needed to be in terms of consumption.
Okay.
Nationalism is not in terms of thinking about or nation building. Nationalism as nation building paradigm shifted to nationalism as consumption. So now we're holding Snapchat CEOs accountable
Right.
and kind of faltering right where we are.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean
That's
that's
very interesting. Thank you.
welcome.
Yes, so for now, I at least couldn't see any hand. Just in case there is any comment, any further questions. Giri, if you are still there, could you just add a couple of, I think Giri has left. Okay.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are, yeah,
Okay,
please.
okay. Yeah, I
Yeah.
put in something in the ear. I'm not sure whether I'm speaking too loudly or not.
Yes, so it's about language ideology also, so we just like you
Yeah,
to comment on the works, right?
no,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you very much thank you to both the panelists for this really rich presentation of their work. There's much to read and much to learn. Thank you so much. I was just thinking of, uh, 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 since the first question was about a kind of beginner's entry into language lives. I was thinking of this book by edited by Rajesh Sachdeva and Ramakant Agnihotri, Being and Becoming Multilingual,
Okay.
2022, Orient Black Swan. Uh, it has 14 sociolinguists uh, talking about their linguistic lives. It's really fascinating. Uh, some are more accessible and some are less accessible. These are people who write in different styles, but it's a really excellent volume to get a sense of the range of uh, language experiences and the reflections of these people. I mean, they're all fairly senior people in that sense. They've had decades of thinking already behind them. But I'm sure when Smriti and Nirmali get around to writing their own linguistic lives, multilingual lives, it will be equally enriching. Thank you.
Thank you, Giri. Any further question by anyone? All right, so it's been a while now. I
Manoj,
think,
may
yes,
I? May I?
please,
All right.
please,
Hi.
please.
Thank you to the both of you for the lovely presentations and for the wonderful insights that you brought to the table. You know, I'm speaking from, of course, experience. One of the common refrain among our students, and this has been pretty much consistent over the years, is the kind of experiences that they bring from the school. And in case of most of them, these aren't very pleasant experiences, especially when it comes to questions around gender, sexuality. Um, I'm not talking about class here at the moment. And I know that these experiences are not the same. They are very different depending upon the school and the kind of context and the neighborhood that they come from. Uh, I was very so they often talk about experiences of segregation, of exclusion, of being pushed into these compartments and slots, especially in relation to sports, especially in relation to food. Now, obviously, this is also about religion that Nirmali spoke about. I am very interested to know. I mean, Nirmali did speak about how school choices are made, and dress code and all of that, and what mothers think. But I was also very curious to know what the actual practices within the school. Like Smriti said, she spoke to teachers. So I just wanted to know if you spoke to students and what did they have to say on this, if that was within the scope of your work. I'm not too sure about that. Maybe you could throw some light on
Nirmali, you want to go first?
Oh, as you wish, man. Yeah.
I think you should go first. I think this is very.
Okay. Okay. So on the issue of gender and food and dress code, right? That's and the schooling. Okay, the student's perspective. Yeah. So
and and sexuality.
and sexuality, right? Uh, s- so initially, see, during my initial fieldwork, the, the, there was a very implicit and implied discussion about it from the students and from their parents' side. There's a very telling insight from the teachers were very. The teachers are very, they usually act as disciplining force in the school. So there was one incident, for example, when people have, applied mehendi on there, which for which there was a kind of a disciplinary measure, and the reasoning that was given that these are we are a co-ed school, we are working in this kind of a location, we have to be really cautious, we don't want any kind of mixing that is not seen well. So there were kind of clear instructions coming from the school authorities which had repercussions for the lives of students within the school space, which was clearly there, in terms of how one dresses, what kind of dress is okay, what kind of adornments are not okay, what kind of interactions are all right, what kind of interactions are not all right. And these concerns, many of, through in collaborative work through with my students, I was able to explore in much more detail, particularly about the gendered aspect, where one of the student had actually focused mainly on this, the girl students' narratives coming from different perspective, where how teachers, female teachers, male teachers, and the girl students themselves interact with these, regimes of surveillance, disciplinarian attitude. So there are two things which are very important. One, of course, there is a very clear kind of a lines, in terms of how is one expected to dress within the codes of, school uniform. Also there are variations, how to tie the dupatta, how not to tie the dupatta, how to tie your hair. All those things are very clearly laid out within the school, and again mixing with boys and not. Now when we look at it from students perspective, that is your question, and that was when the idea of countercultures help us to understand not just the official disciplinarian narratives, but also how it is then negotiated with by the girl students themselves. As I said, and I could gain these insights in case of Assam in much more detail than I was able to do it in Banaras. What comes out is that here we have a very strong notions of community-based identity, which is gendered in nature, and the idea of bhal ghor or swali, the good girls do certain kind of acts while the others don't do. Now, these ideas inform the discussion of the school culture, authority from the authority perspective, as well as in the peer groups. There are different degrees to which this is absorbed. So there are peer group evaluations which create another universe in which different kinds of ideas about gendered conduct are tolerated, accepted, and subverted. For example, on the day of Saraswati Puja, that is a very big celebration across Assam. It is celebrated in the educational institutions that Saraswati Puja, everyone comes up dressed up, and it is a kind of a day when you are expected to dress according to the community traditional norms, and that is the day when you can see this on display. This is where girls actually subvert the school codes and practices of how to dress up. How do we dress up modestly? How can we become modest or fashionable? There are different meanings given to the same event from different groups of girls. The girls who want to remain in the good books of the student and do not want to compromise on their good student identity, they have to navigate it much more in a difficult manner, where they have to maintain the norms set by the peer groups, as well as secure their reputation in the eyes of the teachers. While there are other groups, the more rebellious, the open, independent girls who take license, liberty, they will stay away from the teachers, will not greet them, will form their own secret group, and they will engage. So this is very interesting dynamics, but we also have to understand that the school is not a very homogeneous kind of a space with one clear line of discipline and hierarchy. There are competing, spaces. Peer group plays a very important role. If we want to understand girl students' perspective about school life, then peer group is the space from where we also need to understand how these dictates of discipline coding are accepted, tolerated, subverted, and challenged. That's what I learned from my recent engagement with schooling processes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leena, for that question. I'm going to respond to that not just as having studied in Delhi for the longest time. I am also going to respond to this as a professor who sees the newer generation on a daily basis and the sections that they come from. And one of the things that strikes me is that there is a wide variation in the ways in which sexuality gets imprinted upon the experiences of women in India. And that chasm keeps getting wider and wider as I speak to more and more people. One of the things that I would say is, even from my own experiences, one thing that we need to think about is that there is not a point in a girl child's life or experiences of schooling where she's not sexualized. And so the dress itself, the dress of wearing skirts, is in and of itself the institutionalized way of sexualizing a girl child's body already. Where she has the least amount of control, she walks into that structure, her movements and her demeanor already get disciplined by the kind of dress that she's wearing. Now, when I see girls going from my neighborhood, going to school, and they're wearing lowers, and it feels empowering, it feels nice to see that change, that shift has happened. Those girls can now sit and breathe and move about in ways that I did not experience. And so I'm immediately I'm very alert and very sensitive to that shift that has happened, wherein institutional gaze and dressing of the body already sexualizes the girl. Now, the problem happens when the girl starts sexualizing herself, when she experiences the identity and she claims ownership of her behavior, her embodiment. The moment the skirt goes 2 inches above is where sexuality becomes a problem. The problem is not sexualization of the girl child. The problem is where the control rests with the girl. And so increasingly what is happening is some of the newer schools, the ones that were looking outside India, are not able to contain the culture that they're exposing these children to. And therefore, this understanding that I control my sexuality, or I'm going to be in greater control of my sexuality, is increasingly becoming part of the culture that these children are exposed to as part of their exposure and holistic education and the rest of it. And therefore, now the schools are finding it even more difficult to impose institutionalized, sexualized moral code of conduct. And so you see that kind of a clash happening all the time. I do interact with young women who are coming to colleges for the first time and experiencing attention from boys or the desire for the first time outside of the gaze of parents and communities and the neighborhood and family and school. But I also know of young women who are in sort of interacting with these girls, but also growing this idea of how sexuality is my own and I control it and I will control how I present myself. It's this idea of the good girl. So with respect to the parents, because I did not get the permission to talk to minors from the institutional background because it is a sensitive topic. Sexuality is not an easy topic to talk to young girls about. But in the parents that I talked to understood that there are limits to how far they will be able to impose the good girl sort of an idea or the respectable woman idea that all of us have grown up with. What instead is kind of sort of passed through is this idea of discreetness. So not telling information that can become implicating or sure, embodying sexuality, but not letting other people have information about it beyond a point. And so discreteness becomes important. It becomes important in my own experience of accessing the field as well, of what I get read as. A classed sexuality is one which is discrete, which is going to be discrete. And a sort of a suspect sexuality is itself, it fractures your claim to middle class status as well. You cannot be crass. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of very nuanced. I like the question. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Smriti. I think we can possibly close the conversation now. It's been a while. So it's been really, really interesting. What I would say that, see, there are some simple narratives around education. Education is, a space for equal opportunities. Education is something where you can aspire based on your individual efforts and all that. So those, simple, plain narratives, which is floating around, creating sort of ideologies. And unfortunately, that simple narrative is not just sort of giving those ideological shape to our understanding, but also informing the policies. What I desire that somehow the complex narratives you have given, the way actually schoolings and the decisions within the families, the way it is taking, say, through multiple lenses and, several complexities, those narratives are important. I could just sort of hope that, policies are policy, education policy, the way we are imagining institutions are being informed by these insights and understanding. So thank you for agreeing to this conversation, bringing your work, and it was quite enriching, at least personally for me, and I'm sure for the people who joined here. Leena, would you like to
Yeah.
just close by
Thank you,
few words?
Manoj.
Yes.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Manoj. But I would now like to invite Dr. Roopa, who is the co-convener of RC-32. And yes, Roopa, over to you.
Thank you, Leena. And thank you, everyone, for this really engaging session. I think we were all riveted to the conversation because of the richness that kept unfolding in the ways in which the presentations took us through these complexities. So, I mean, especially for a pedagogue, I feel that, sometimes we see that the undergrad classroom is something that we've inherited and that there's nothing we can do with what has happened before. And in that sense, I think what Manoj said in the end, that the complexities that have been brought in through the presentations will not just inform policy, one hopes, but also teaching practices for all of us. The community of practice that we are, it will enrich our ways of understanding what the students have, what processes they have been through, and how, I mean, both the panelists have spoken about the spatial fractures that have informed their entry into the undergrad classroom. So thank you so much for that. I mean, I think and the theoretical frameworks that were presented also were for many of us, I think, things that will endure as we go forward. This thing of, occupying context, but having sort of belonging elsewhere and referencing the elsewhere, I think is significant. We all encounter it every day, especially those of us who teach in sort of metro contexts, encounter this in the classrooms, also in the aspirations that they have. And this, the pedagogical practices of bringing in labs and hands-on and all of that, I think also keeps getting us into the same loop of what do we reference and how do we sort of speak to the student whose aspirations are belonging somewhere else. And thank you also for the the work that helped us understand schooling as a social space, and how the social processes are informed through also the intersections of honor, respect, of community, of gender, of just sort of bringing us an understanding of what this embodied nature of class is. So thank you for that. Manoj, thank you so much for gently shepherding this conversation throughout. I mean, for setting the frame in the beginning, and then, helping us also relate Smriti's work with Nirmali's work, and in the end, sort of holding all this together. Your way of anchoring this conversation has been really very sort of helpful and guiding for the listener. So thank you for that. I think the questions were really, the questions and the engagement was, as always, what we've learned to expect in the RC now. They come from a space of curiosity, of humility, of a wish to learn and to sort of then apply. So thank you so much for the questions and the participants who spoke and who also have listened and commented. And in the end, thank you, Leena, for the kind of vision that you bring in, because I think we wouldn't have these sessions if you wouldn't be working, in the back scenes and getting all of this to happen. So thank you so much for this. I think all of us really derive great insight when we attend these sessions. So thank you for that. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for staying till 8 in the evening on Saturday. For, like I said, we are a community of practice, and it's really heartening to always be with fellow practitioners who are getting to understand the space of the classroom. So thank you so much, all of you.
Thank you so much for having
Thank
me.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you
to
so much.
each one of you. Thanks a lot to the participants also. Bye-bye.
Bye.